everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, there's no time for feelings. There's no time for emotion. There's no time for power pauses. The Ohio State-Michigan game is one day away, Tony, and we have 100,000 questions from listeners that we need to answer. There's no time. We need to build a time machine and go back in time to get all these questions in, Tony. Please stop messing around. There's no time. First question from @fun_magnets. Tony, if Mayan and Henderson can't go and Corum can, is Dallan Hayden good enough to get the win for Ohio State?
If Mayan can't go, that would be obviously significant, and it would surprise me if he can't. If Blake Corum can go, I don't think he can be 100%. I don't know that he's 90%. And if he's at 80% and Dallan Hayden is at 100%, like I think almost regardless, not necessarily regardless of what Blake Corum is, if Dallan Hayden is good enough to move the ball and keep them ahead of the chains, as we keep talking about, then then that is good enough to beat Michigan. It's the long down and distance. It's getting stopped on first down. It's losing yards on first down. Dallan Hayden has proven to this point that he is the kind of running back that can get you some good yards and get you enough yards. And right now, I think enough yards is good enough to get the dub.
And, this is kind of a theoretical question because Blake Corum is not going to be 100% if he does play. Mayan Williams is almost certainly going to play. TreVeyon Henderson kind of will see, and we'll see how many snaps TreVeyon Henderson plays. But, I think the answer, if you're going to take the theoretical question of Blake Corum is at 100% and Dallan Hayden is, the only Ohio State running back who can play, I think at that point it's a concern. And, Blake Corum being 100% changes so much about this game. But Blake Corum in his current state, whatever that may be, is going to not be Blake Corum at 100%. And that's going to be a pretty significant difference. That's, we have a question later that we'll see if we get to it about, CJ Stroud versus Blake Corum, who's more important. But, if you take CJ Stroud and CJ Stroud is playing at 70%, we saw CJ Stroud playing with a bad shoulder last year, and it didn't look like what you normally expect from CJ Stroud. Blake Corum on a bad knee is kind of like that to me. So I think in the theoretical world where Blake Corum is 100%, the answer is probably no. But in the current world where Blake Corum is definitely not 100%, I think the answer is yes, that potentially would be enough for Ohio State to get the win. Next one from Zalexan. Does Mike Hall get a higher snap count this game? Nothing to save him for anymore. I would expect him to get a higher snap count. But, do you consider Mike Hall more of a run stopper or more of a pass rusher? And how would that figure into your answer here?
I think that definitely figures into the answer. I think he's more of a pass rusher than a run stopper. They love Ty Hamilton in that role at nose tackle. And yet you saw last week against Maryland, you'd rather have your pass rushing nose tackle out there, but Mike Hall still only played 13 snaps. As Jim Knowles said, he's been playing through something pretty significant. And so they had Ty Hamilton out there for 35 snaps as I'm looking at our buddy Dan Hope's snap counts. It's been a while since Mike Hall. Mike Hall had those 7 snaps against Michigan State and then had good snaps the next 2 games and then has not played over 20 snaps, over 19 snaps the last 3 weeks. I don't know that he's necessarily going to exceed any of that. Again, it's Ty Hamilton is continued to step up, and it's not sexy. It's not stat laden because he's just there trying to stop the run. And this week, I think that's what you need. But also, if you can get Mike Hall is going to play. And if he can get into the backfield and ruin a drive, sometimes all it takes is one tackle for loss to ruin a drive. And that's a winning play.
Yeah, one tackle for loss, one sack, one holding penalty that gets you off schedule, any of those. There's a way for Mike Hall to, win the game by, blowing up one drive without even getting on the stat sheet because, there's no penalties drawn line on the stat column. But, yeah, he's someone who I don't think you're going to see play a ton, but you're going to see play more, I think, because the more he's healthy, the better off he's going to be. If you get into a Big Ten championship game against, if they end up playing Purdue in the Big Ten championship game, I think that has a potential to be a real Mike Hall impact game. But we'll see. By the time by the time Friday afternoon rolls around, we may know that the Ohio State Michigan winner is cursed to another game of Ferentz ball. So we'll see how that one goes. Next one from @the4strong. Consider the Buckeyes lose a very close game Saturday, so close they make the playoffs. Michigan plays the number 2-3 team and loses. Buckeyes end up winning out and crowned national champions, but still have the one loss. Is that a successful season? I say not really. Can't lose that game. Hard one. My answer: are you nuts? If you win a national championship, that's a successful season. That is the very definition of a successful season. That's, I know beating Michigan is goal number 1 on the Ohio State goal list, and it's beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, and win the national championship. In this case, you've only reached one of your goals. If you were to choose one of the goals, which goal would you choose, Tony? It feels like that would be the goal you would choose, right? So,
yeah, that's the biggest one. And if you hit 2 of your 3 goals, it is a successful season. And this is an issue that I'm seeing and having with Ohio State fans right now. For how many years, as Ohio State dominated with Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer, did we hear it's not even a rivalry anymore. It's boring. It's this, it's that. Then you lose one, and all of a sudden everybody is like, I want my win back. I want my Michigan win back. It is the most important thing. You didn't care about it as much when it was guaranteed. Then you get it taken away from you, and now you're like, where is my birthright? And the thing is, this win doesn't belong to anybody. It's something that you get that year. And if you don't happen to get it that year, but you win a national championship, that's a great year. If you don't get it, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to somebody else. It was earned by somebody else. And it's not something that is just, I am owed this. This is entitled to it. You're not entitled to it. And if you don't win it, then somebody else did. Give somebody else the credit. It's a rivalry. It's supposed to go back and forth. And if you don't believe that, then you've kind of forgotten the point of a rivalry, I think.
Was 2011 Alabama's season a success? Because they lost to LSU at home, 9-6. And then they ended up beating LSU in the BCS title game. And in this scenario, Ohio State does not beat Michigan in the playoff. Michigan loses the semifinal, and Ohio State beats presumably Georgia and then whoever beat Michigan. But I go back to 1996. Ohio State loses to Michigan, but they win the Rose Bowl for the first time in 13 years or something like that. And then they also finish number 2 in the country. They get 1.5 first place votes. If that's not a successful season, then was 2004 a successful season? Because Ohio State beat Michigan, but they didn't win the national championship of the Big Ten. So which was a more successful season, 96 or 2004? And it just feels like, if you go 12-1, last year's Ohio State team was 11-2 and won the Rose Bowl, and I think there's an argument to be made that was a successful season, even without winning the Big Ten. This, you're 12-1 and you're winning, or 13-1 and you're winning the national championship. That to me is a no-brainer. You're not going to win every game undefeated by 100-0 shutout, but. And I know that losing the Michigan game is unpalatable for Ohio State fans in a way that losing to Virginia Tech in 2014 and still winning the national championship, that was kind of that was a stupid game, but then they won the national championship and beat Michigan. I get that this is not the way you would choose to do it, but if that's not a successful season, you should probably stop watching because, the bar for a successful season is just going to mean you're going to end every year miserable. So that's, yeah.
And then you will have, obviously, Michigan fans chirping, which is never fun for an Ohio State fan. And if Michigan wins a second game or a third game in a row, they've got that streak. But Ohio State still has the national championship to point to. And that's where we go back to the Mozzie Smith thing when we were in Ann Arbor and asking him about the rivalry and winning consecutively. And he's like, that's more of a thing for fans. Every team is its own unique thing. And so you want to win that game. Next year will take care of itself. Whatever happens, happens. But it's not so much thinking about strings or streaks. That's for fans.
Yeah, the last time Michigan did, if in this scenario, Ohio State wins the national championship and a full undisputed national championship for the second time in 8 years and the third time this century. The last time Michigan did that, the Marshall Plan was still in effect. I mean, it's just there. If someone's giving you crap online about that, say, ask your grandparents what it's like to have this happen, and then you'll understand why this is a big deal. And then that ends the argument. So there you go. You're welcome. Online discourse presented by the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. Next one from Isaac McIntyre. What would be more shocking to you, Michigan finally clicking in the long pass game while gashing Ohio State for big plays, or Ohio State playing a complete game in terms of balance between the run and the pass? This one feels pretty clear-cut to me, don't you think?
Yeah, because I think Ohio State has played complete games in terms of balance between the run and the pass this year. And so it wouldn't be shocking to finally do that or anything. It's definitely the Michigan clicking, but also I do expect some of that to happen.
Yeah, I think you're going to see Michigan complete some passes downfield. 2, 3. I mean, what are we? How many? What are we talking about here? Michigan finally clicking the long pass game. Are we talking about this looking like the 2014 Ohio State-Wisconsin game? That would be shocking to me. I don't think they're going to do that, but completing 2 passes 30 yards downfield, does that constitute clicking? I think you're much more likely to see Ohio State be able to put up, I don't know, Tony, like 220 yards rushing and 220 yards passing, just to pull a couple numbers just out of the air here, and put that kind of like all-around balanced performance together, than Michigan, J.J. McCarthy throwing for 450 yards and having it be a good thing where they're not, it's not like the Dwayne Haskins throwing for 400 and a million yards against Purdue in 2018 where you're trying to come from behind. Michigan throwing for 400 and something yards in a win would be much more surprising to me. Next one, also from at Isaac McIntyre. Who do you think is more vital to their team's success, Stroud or Corum? This is an interesting one. I think you're going to see not having Blake Corum out there definitely impacts what I think is going to happen on Saturday, or having Blake Corum in a very limited role on Saturday, whichever one that ends up being. I think that potentially changes the team that I'm thinking about picking to win the game. But CJ Stroud, there is Donovan Edwards, and you've seen Donovan Edwards put up big games this year. Kyle McCord they have not played him. They've barely played him at all this year. And he was okay last year against Akron, and I feel like Kyle McCord's going to be an effective quarterback for Ohio State in 2023. I haven't seen it this year, and that's not Kyle McCord's fault. So I think CJ Stroud is the answer here. Don't you?
Well, I think if you look at it and say, if CJ Stroud is healthy and Corum is out, obviously you give the advantage to Michigan or to Ohio State. But if Corum is healthy and Stroud is out, that seems like a wild swing, because you've seen what is behind Michigan and those players have played. And even with Corum playing, even if Corum is 100% in this game, it still feels like a close game and could go either way. You might pick Michigan by like 4 or 7, something like that, perhaps. But if Stroud is out and Corum is 100%, that shifts the line way more than Corum being out. I think we're seeing the line it's impacted a little by Corum, but it would be impacted, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 points more if Stroud is out.
Yeah, I would say
at least.
I mean, you could see that line move a touchdown if Stroud's out. And I think that's just, because of the way Ohio State has really not played its backups very much, it's just, I think there's just a lot more uncertainty there. With Donovan Edwards, there's some, questions about health and all that. And, the drop off from Blake Corum to CJ Stokes is probably bigger than the drop off from CJ Stroud to Kyle McCord. Almost certainly drop bigger than that. But you haven't seen Kyle McCord this year. I think if you had seen Kyle McCord in the way we were expecting to see Kyle McCord, where he's coming in the third quarter of a bunch of these games, and when he comes in, he's throwing the ball and he's not just handing it off, I think then you might at least have the conversation. But you haven't seen it this year, that has been weird to me all year and continues to be weird to me. Like
if it would have been 2017 and Dwayne Haskins starts that game against Michigan, I don't think things would have been as drastic, because he had thrown the ball quite a bit that season. if Ohio State is a 7.5 point favorite right now and CJ Stroud is out, do they enter that game as favorites? Especially with the Blake Corum? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think that they do. I think that you're looking at moving the line 8, 9, 10 points, and Blake Corum being banged up has not, the line has not moved that much. So no, I think that's a pretty clear-cut answer there. Next one from @Buckeye Football. How is the Ohio State rushing defense different from last year heading into the game? I feel like Ohio State dominated in run defense in the first 8 Big Ten games last year as well.
Well, it's different in that it is in the right place, and the players are in the right place, and they know what they're doing, and they work together to do it. Listening to Tommy Eichenberg talk on Tuesday during interviews about how this year they just have a better understanding of where they are and how to get there. And last year there were times when you're in games and you're not necessarily confident in what you're supposed to do. And that's a terrible feeling for a defense, terrible position to put a defender in. And that's one of the reasons Jim Knowles says anything that bad happens in a game, that's on me for not getting the players prepared. And they've been prepared this year. And I think they're deep on the defensive line. They're, as Ryan Day says, they're all a year older, which helps significantly. And Steel Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg as linebackers are playing better than the linebackers played last year. And we saw them flip through so many different guys, Cody Simon, Taraja Mitchell, Steel Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg, and none of them were outstanding. When Steel Chambers comes in as a former running back and is immediately almost your best linebacker, that's a concern. And so those guys are all more experienced. Cody Simon's playing very well as the third linebacker. Tommy Eichenberg didn't make it as I believe a Butkus finalist, but is going to be on some All-American teams this year, leading the Big Ten in solo tackles. And yeah, they're different because they're better and they're more experienced and they're more sound, and the scheme is actually a scheme and it all works in conjunction with each other.
And this time last year, Ohio State gave up 5 rushing plays of 30 yards. This year they've only given up 2. So I mean, you're just seeing not even the 80-yard plays that we've seen in the past. I think like the 2018 defense just getting gashed for long plays constantly. Even just the plays that are pretty notable but not massively explosive. Ohio State has really cut that in less than half right now. So yeah, I think that's you've sort of seen it schematically, you've seen it statistically. And just looking at it on the field, they're not getting run on as much as they did last year. And, not run on in terms of average run, not run on in terms of long runs. It's just sort of been better. And you haven't had just, the plays here and there where you're looking and you're like, there's no one there. I always go back to like the 2018 Maryland game where, you put a guy in motion and all of a sudden, hey, there's no one on this entire side of the field when they cut the ball back or run a counter. And you haven't had that. There's always been someone there, and sometimes someone misses a tackle, and that happens. But there has always been someone there, and that is a pretty significant difference from this time last year. Just in case you were curious, I know Kerry Combs is no longer coordinating a defense, but the last time I looked at Memphis's defense, where Matt Barnes is, they were like 90th in SP Plus this year. So hasn't gotten any better with less good players.
Yeah, sorry. One of those 2 running plays was the Braylon Allen at the fourth quarter when the game was way over against Wisconsin. The last one happened this month, and I don't know that it was during a close portion of the game either.
All right, next one from @JasonVote. JSN, Trey, and Mayan, how many snaps each? I think I'm going with JSN 0. Maybe I will be pleasantly surprised and see him back out there. Until I see him back out there, the answer with JSN is 0. Trey and Mayan, as far as snaps go, I mean, I tend to think of running backs more in terms of carries or touches. I think Mayan Williams is probably, let's go with touches, and I'll say Mayan Williams in the 15 to 18 range, and Travion Henderson, I mean, is he in the 0 to 6 range? I mean, I'm not as confident that Travion Henderson isn't playing as I am with JSN, but I would not be surprised if Travion Henderson didn't play or played very sparingly.
Yeah, if we're talking touches, I would say 0 to 3. I unless he is significantly more healthy than he was last week, I don't think you can afford to waste plays. And too many of his plays last week were wastes. And Ryan Day saying, every minute you're not spent working on this game is a minute you've lost. And every play that you give to somebody who isn't going to get you 3 or 4 yards is a play that is lost. And I don't think this is not the time for feelings right now. You've got to just do whatever you can to get the win. And I always have the image of Mike Weber in the locker room of whichever game that was, just Big Ten championship game or a bowl game, just throwing his tape in the wastebasket, just angry that he didn't get any touches or only had like 3 carries or whatever. And you can't waste plays, and you got to get the ball to the guys who can. Mayan, yeah, I'm thinking this could be 15 to 30 carries for him, for touches for him, and then another 10 to 20 for Dallan Hayden, just depending on how things go. And I'm not saying they're going to run the ball 55 times, but I think those guys in that range. If Ohio State has 70 snaps, are we talking like 40 to 30 for Mayan and Dallan? Is it 45-25? Is it 50-20? 50-20 maybe, if he can go.
Yeah, if it's 50-20, then that's real good news for Ohio State, I would say. I mean, the more snaps Mayan Williams is playing, the better for Ohio State. And, especially if we're talking about, if we go back to carries, if Mayan Williams is anywhere around 20 carries, that's probably a very good thing for Ohio State. The only way that's a bad thing is if Dallan Hayden puts the ball on the ground at some point and then they don't trust him anymore. If Mayan Williams, if Dallan Hayden's playing the whole game and Mayan Williams has 20 carries, or as you said 30 at one point. I don't know if that was carries or touches or snaps, but if Mayan Williams is at 25 carries or 30 carries, that is Ohio State is having a monster day on the ground, which would be a very positive thing for Ohio State. Speaking of Ohio State on the ground and potentially in pass pro, from at Brett5958. Last year's pod for the game, you answered my question about Ajabo and Hutchinson against the OSU tackles. So this year, it's how about Mozzie and Graham against OSU's interior line. Last year, Ohio State came in feeling like their tackles were the strength of the line, and then it didn't work out great against Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo. I think the interior of the offensive line, I go back to, we watched practice in, early to mid-August, and we're kind of looking at the interior of the line and going, well, either the interior of Ohio State's defensive line is really good, or they have some issues on the interior of the offensive line. And I think the answer has kind of been a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, but it has not been great on the interior of the line, especially in the run game all season. And now you've got Matt Jones banged up with a foot and ankle thing that has been an issue all season, has only gotten worse. Luke Whippler's not 100%. I think this is, for the Ohio State offense, this is the concern. This is the one singular biggest concern is, how does the interior of that line hold up against the interior of that Michigan defensive line? Because, that you get pressure in your face, you don't have a hole to run through in the middle of the line. That's where you can, you get into 2nd and 10, you get into 3rd and 9. That's where you run into real problems. So, I think the Ohio State offense is going to be reasonably effective against Michigan, but this is, I think, my number one concern for them.
Yeah, and Mozzie Smith, Mason Graham, the true freshman, are two of their, interior guys, as you know. Together, they each only have 2.5 tackles for loss, those two guys, but they are quick, they are active, they are, they can move and they can get around. And with that offensive line struggling as it has on the interior, they're going to need to play their best game, Ohio State is, but also make sure those double teams work. And Mozzie Smith is going to have 2 guys on him for, I think, a lot of this game, especially considering Luke Whippler is not entirely healthy, Matt Jones not at all healthy, and if Michigan is blowing stuff up on the interior, that's going to cause problems on the exterior everywhere. If there's pass rush getting through the middle as well, then that's going to change what CJ Stroud does and the timing and all of that stuff. And it's just my suggestion: block those 2 guys and profit.
That is tremendous advice. I don't know why no one has hired you away as a coordinator of some kind, at least a position coach. I mean, that is just tremendous. So, yeah.
Non-compete clause.
Oh, well, those will get you. Next one from @the_Buckeye. For much of the series history lately, the team with the most rushing yards has won the game. Feel free to check me. Will that hold true for Saturday? One of my favorite stats is a team that has rushed for more yards per carry has won the game every year since 2002. I went back and looked at something and found a stat from you that said the last time that Michigan outrushed Ohio State in terms of just net rushing yardage, that Ohio State won the game was 1994. So yes, this is true by just about any metric. I think it probably does hold true on Saturday, but I think that says more about what I'm sort of starting to expect in terms of, as I'm sort of formulating my thoughts on the game, the bigger I think that Blake Corum absence or partial absence or whatever it's going to be is, I think, if Corum is 100%, I think Michigan is outrushing Ohio State, and I think Michigan has a decent chance to win. Without Corum, I'm just starting to think, I don't know if they're going to be able to outrush in Ohio State, and if they can't, they're really not going to beat Ohio State.
Yeah, that injury changes a lot. And I had said before any type of injury that I felt like this is a game that Ohio State could be outrushed in and still win because of the passing game and the Ohio State defense doing what it does. And just, it's not like you need to score a lot. You just need to score enough. And I felt like they could do that. I was on with Mark Rogers earlier in the week, and he had a Michigan writer on, and he said that he doesn't expect Donovan Edwards to play, and also that Junior Colson may not play. He left the Michigan game, he left the Illinois game late, and was replaced by freshman Jimmy Rolder, who Ohio State wanted late in the process. And so, if you don't have a healthy running game, if with Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, and you don't have a healthy middle linebacker in Junior Colson, or worse yet, a true freshman middle linebacker. We just talked about the defensive tackles for Michigan, but it's going to take more than that to contain Ohio State and then also to outrush Ohio State. So, yeah, I'm feeling more bullish on Ohio State's ability to run the ball right now for a number of reasons.
Yeah, if you have, limited to no Blake Corum, and you have no Donovan Edwards, and you have no Junior Colson, that is when you're getting into a little bit of danger zone for Michigan, where, we did the, Ohio State's guaranteed to beat Michigan, here's why, and Michigan's guaranteed to beat Ohio State this year, and here's why. We did those earlier in the week. That's where you get into the situation where, at the end of the Ohio State show, we talked about okay, what's the realistic best case scenario for Ohio State? And that's the realistic, that's where you get to that spot where Michigan can't run the ball. And then it's just sort of, J.J. McCarthy run around and make some plays. And it's like, that's fine for a while, but that works for 2 touchdowns. And then can you get off the field? Well, Ohio State's on the field. And if you can't hold the ball, you're giving Ohio, it turns into a 14-possession Ohio State game instead of a 10-possession Ohio State game. And, that's probably 2 more touchdowns at least for Ohio State. That's where stuff starts to snowball for Michigan, and it could be really bad. And next one here from @AthletesInSpace. Does playing the 2020 game and Ohio State winning big, as many expected, affect the current state of Michigan's program in any material way? And, Tony, this is an interesting one, because if Michigan loses that game, and they're 2-7, and then they've lost to Ohio State, Ohio State was a 30-point favorite in that game, and I think, going into that week with as shorthanded as Michigan was going to be, and Dan Villari at quarterback, and that team was just kind of a mess, and they had been, the defensive backs were not very good. That felt like a game where if Ohio State came out and wanted to put 70 points on Michigan, they probably could have. So, let's just sort of play this out, and Ohio State wins that game 63-10 or 70-17 or whatever you want to say. Does Jim Harbaugh come back at that point? Because, Jim Harbaugh, it was 2-6, and you kind of could hand wave it as well. It was a bad year. But then if you've lost to Michigan State, and you've just gotten just vaporized by Ohio State in a way that you haven't in the past. Like, I mean, that was already summer of 2021. There was no one. I mean, you can go back and listen to us talk about the status of Michigan's program at that point. There was nobody who thought that was, that was Michigan was about to turn the corner and completely change everything around. And, if you were the person, like, congratulations, you're the Michigan version of Rutgers Al, where it's like, well, eventually I will predict this shocking upset correctly because I've predict them to turn things around, win the national championship every year since 1902. Like, congratulations. But I think there's a possibility that if Ohio State wins by that much in that spot, that it becomes so untenable for Michigan, that it's like, you can sell hope, but at that point you're 0 and what? They lost in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 0 and 6. I think, you're 0 and 6, you just lost by 56 points to Ohio State or whatever it was. I think at that point you're probably making a change, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I don't know who that would be. Matt Campbell, maybe that would be the popular name. Maybe Brian Kelly. But I think because you're talking like what would the score be, and I'm thinking 70-0. I mean, honestly, is Dan Villari going to drive them down the field and score with? It's Ohio State's defense, so probably yes. The answer is yes.
At some point, Tuff Borland is covering someone that he shouldn't be covering, and but I mean, even if it's 56-17, like, okay, then you've lost the last 3 years 62-39, and then 56-27, and then 56-17. Like, there's nothing there that says this is there's a trend anywhere. And you had teams who had the one bad year, the bad COVID year, and it turned out to be the bad COVID year for Michigan. But if you've got that kind of 3-year trend for Michigan where it's, you had the weird first year, but then the second year you're super competitive, the third year you lose by 11, the fourth year you lose by 20, the fifth year you lose by 20, or the fourth year you lose by 28, and then you lose by 40 or 50. I mean, the trend there is real undeniable. So, yeah, I think there's a very significant chance. You never know, you can't guarantee it, but I think there's a very significant chance that Michigan has a different head coach if that game gets played and plays out in the way that I think it might have in that case. Next one from @MGO Humor. Do you think JT was short? As a Michigan fan, when I watched it live, I was unsure, but once the ruling on the field was good, I knew they weren't overturning it.
I don't know if he was short, but if he was, it wasn't by much. So what's the deal? What's the problem? Like, it's right there. I mean, is this a game of inches? No, it's football. I mean, nobody's ever called this a game of inches, but the ref marked it at the 15 immediately, the line judge. So, I mean, he saw it, got a good look. There's no perfect angle, but I don't think it crossed the line. Like, I don't think it crossed the entire line. I think it hit the line and is like, that's all I need to do. I'm done.
It was one of those where he's exactly right. There's no way you were overturning it because there was no video evidence to overturn it. And, I remember there was a well-known Michigan blogger who called the officials cowards for not overturning it. It's like, okay, like, what looked like indisputable video evidence to overturn that? Like, if they had marked him short, he was going to be short. If they had gave him the spot, he was going to have the spot. Like, there was not enough to overturn that. And, there was on one of the Michigan sites, there was someone who was a, astrophysicist or an engineer at Ford or something who did used AutoCAD to manipulate the video and ended up determining that yes, in fact, he had made it by 6 inches or whatever. It's one of those things where whatever they called on the field was going to be, was going to stand up on replay because there was not clear and conclusive video evidence. But that was a Michigan person with a bunch of comma and then a bunch of letters after their name. So sure, that's fine. I will trust Carl Sagan or whoever it was on the Michigan boards who was who was calling the spot good. Next one from Matt, 14er vibes. If Urban Meyer went to Michigan in 2011 instead of OSU in 2012, is Michigan the alpha in this rivalry right now?
Growing up in the 80s and 90s, and when you first start following recruiting in like the 90s, and Michigan was a national recruiter. Like, they recruited from all over the place. It wasn't just a Midwest thing, and they didn't just go into Ohio. They were out in California. They were everywhere. They were a national program. And as growing up an Ohio State fan and seeing like all of these players from everywhere, they go to Michigan, and Ohio State's base is like in Ohio, and then, maybe some down to Florida and maybe some to Pennsylvania. It's interesting that you've completely flipped things. And that was John Cooper flipping that, I think. He turned Ohio State into a recruiting hotbed in terms of you can start branching out and going all over the place. Then Jim Tressel did it while also staying close to home. But Urban Meyer taking over Michigan in 2011, I think they would be recruiting better, and they'd be more national, and there'd be more Florida players, more DMV players, more California. I don't know if there'd be more California players. Urban didn't like to go out to California unless he was pretty much guaranteed that it was going to be worth their while. But UM being the alpha in the rivalry right now, to say it would be more even seems silly, because right now Michigan is coming in on a 1-0 winning streak. But it's an interesting thought process, because if Urban Meyer is at Michigan, who is at Ohio State? And is it Luke Fickell? Is it I don't even know who it would be at that point. If Matt Campbell wasn't really a guy. Bob Stoops turned it down a couple of times. Like, I don't know who would that be, and can they? Good luck keeping up with Urban Meyer. And what would Urban Meyer do in Ohio as Michigan's head coach?
Yeah, because that's always been the thing that has given Ohio State a little bit of a built-in advantage over Michigan, is the fact you've got the in-state recruiting base that's so much stronger. If Urban Meyer can, dip into that, you have seen what happens when Michigan can dip into Ohio and pull some of the best players. Early 90s to mid 90s, Elvis Gerbach, Desmond Howard, Charles Woodson, like, you have seen Michigan with access to the Ohio talent base. That's something that I think would really potentially be a significant change. I do think, I don't know that Urban Meyer gets Michigan to a national championship, but I think Urban Meyer, just based on being Urban Meyer 10 years ago, is, the dominant force in the Big Ten at that point. And I'm sure you'll have, can he recruit with the Michigan academic standards, yada, yada, yada. Not every Michigan football player ever has been a Rhodes Scholar, breaking news, but, I think you're going to have a significant difference. And I don't know that Michigan is 9-1 in the last 10 editions of the game, but I think they're, if you told me it was 6-4 Michigan over the last 10 years, yeah, I could see that.
I think maybe the real answer is that, he would have only been at Michigan for 1 year because Ohio State would have offered him the job, and then he would have taken it.
that would have been the single greatest troll move in the history of football.
If Urban is not available, does Jim Tressel get fired?
That's also an interesting question. And are you back channeling to Urban in Ann Arbor? Like, hey, why is Michigan not recruiting well under Urban Meyer? Oh, you'll find out at the end of November. Don't worry. Yeah, Urban seems way more chill than I expected. Just wait. Yeah, that's that's a whole fascinating alternate history. That's right up there with what if West Virginia had beaten Pitt in 2007, and then what if Rich Rod took the Alabama job when that was offered? I mean, there's a bunch of different variations on that the Michigan program goes a very different direction one way or another at that point. Here's an interesting one from @14er Vibes. What 3 players from Michigan would you add to Ohio State if you could to take into the playoffs to beat Georgia? I mean, I'm thinking interior offensive line is a spot where you feel like Michigan probably is better than Ohio State, or more solid than Ohio State. I mean, right now with Matt Jones banged up, you'd probably, you'd slide the right guard over. Do you take Oluwatimi over Luke Whippler? Whippler's been good, but Whippler's been a little bit banged up. I mean, where would you go?
Well, here's the thing. Trying to think, Zach Zinter maybe is their right guard, and he's okay. So do you take Oluwatimi and put him at right guard? And is that an insult to him? Perhaps. Is Luke Whippler a right guard? He's not. Like, he's a center. But do you? This is a silly thing, but it's like, well, you can't change centers midstream. So you can't almost go with Oluwatimi because nobody knows them and blah blah blah. And now we're getting into this, taking it too seriously. But that's where you kind of have to start. You look at the weaknesses, and right now it's like, well, not Blake Corum because he's hurt, but he might be 100% by the time you get to Georgia. But also Ohio State likes their guys already as is. So Tom, there's nobody. No, Mozzie Smith. Mozzie Smith, and I don't know that you need Mike Morris. You've got enough defensive ends, but do you want more? Sure, but I think Mozzie Smith for me is one of the first two that you talk about. Oluwatimi being another, and a third. Do you need another pass catching tight end? I don't know that you do. I think they're pretty good at tight end. I don't know. Give me a third.
Yeah, I mean, I think Blake Corum. If you think Blake Corum's healthy for the playoff, I think Blake Corum's got to be one of the answers because Mayan Williams has been very good this year. He's been banged up. Travion Henderson has been he's been okay this year. He's been banged up. Blake Corum is a very legitimate Heisman contender. I think if you have a chance to take an additional Heisman skill player and someone who is, able to move that pile, like Blake Corum, I think is like almost the ideal running back for the Ohio State offense. So, yeah, I think Corum, Oluwatimi, and Mozzie Smith, I think are good choices. You mentioned Mike Morris there. All right, let's talk Mike Morris. Why does JT Tuimoloau get so much more hype than Mike Morris? Morris is more consistently dominant, has better stats. Is it just the 247 recruiting ranking in the Penn State game from at 14er vibes? I looked up JT Tuimoloau's stats, and it's like, oh, he really hasn't had as many. Morris has 8 sacks. Tuimoloau has, I think it was 3.5. Chrome didn't shut down correctly, so I'll have to let you know later, but I believe it was 3.5 sacks for Tuimoloau. But when you have the Penn State game like he did, like you're seeing what he can be. And, Morris has been good all year, but it's sort of situational. I think when you look at NFL, kind of NFL draft time, who's going to get drafted higher? I mean, potentially by half a round, maybe more. I mean, I think that there's just a, the JT Tuimoloau is an athletic freak in a way that most people are not, and that's going to be a differentiator there.
Yeah, Mike Morris 3.5 sacks in like his last 6 games, and so he started to slow down a little bit. JT Tuimoloau in the last 6 games, 4 sacks, so it's like he's kind of picking it up. Also, is the Ohio State defense out there for more time? So JT maybe should have more sacks, but they rotate a lot, but so does Michigan. But also, when you're playing either of these teams, you're trying to get the ball out as quickly as possible. So sacks aren't always a great measurement, but Mike Morris does his thing, and he's very good. And you saw what happened to Michigan with him out last week. They almost lost. So I think there's, to answer the question, yes, the ranking, yes, the Penn State game. How can you ignore that game? I mean, if you try, then you're trying too hard. And, tell Mike Morris to have 2 interceptions against Ohio State, a couple of sacks, a forced fumble, a pick 6, a fumble recovery. If he does that, then maybe somebody will talk about him.
If he does that, you're going to get lynched for speaking into existence. So, yeah. Again, at Tony Gerdeman, friends. That's next one from at CW Moore. Not sure what Matt Jones' injury was, but he's been struggling regardless. Confidence in Enoch Mamahi to plug and replace without drop-off. And Matt Jones just had a foot thing all year, and then just looked like he got bent backwards and just rolled it or popped it or something right at the end of that Maryland game. And I think the struggles that you've seen from him are injury-related. He hasn't looked quite the same in the run game, especially this year, where he was just such a powerful, just drive blocker last year, and just haven't seen that from him this year. So I think I chalk a lot of that up to the injury. As far as confidence in Enoch Mamahi, you kind of have to defer to the coaches who have seen him in practice every day. And we were questioning a couple weeks ago, why are they not playing Enoch Mamahi? Because Matt Jones doesn't look right. The fact that they haven't been playing him makes you wonder what the level of confidence from the coaches is in Enoch Mamahi. And is Matt, if a compromised, whatever it is, 85% Matt Jones or whatever percentage you want to put on him, is still clearly to the coaches better than Enoch Mamahi, then, I think that has to be a concern for Ohio State going into this game. But, from our perspective, we're kind of just guessing based on what the coaches are, everyone says they have confidence in him, but this may be a little bit of a watch what they do, not what they say kind of situation. So we'll see on Saturday, but I think that has to be a little bit of a question mark, don't you?
Yeah, I also think Ryan Day has spoken about the chemistry that you have as an offensive line, and it's hard to get that late in the season by throwing somebody new in there. But then you see what Josh Fryer did a couple weeks ago, and he was very good, and they didn't seem to have any issues having a new guy in there. It's been, if you felt bad for Matt Jones trying to watch him get to a spot or reach for something and trying to be as mobile as they need him to be, and he just can't, and that gives him takes away some of his balance, because when he gets somewhere he's not at full strength and he can get pushed easier. Like he's still pretty decent straight ahead, but it's the lateral stuff that has given him some trouble. And clearly they like Matt Jones better. I think there's some chemistry stuff that maybe that concerns them, especially when you're still trying to find your identity in short yardage.
Yeah, so we'll see on Saturday. I think you're probably going to see someone other than Matt Jones starting at right guard. That's my guess right now, but we'll see. Next one from Matt Happy Trail 0127. Any chance we make this a 7-on-7 since neither team has more than 7 healthy players? Tony, how many points is Ohio State favored in a 7-on-7 game where if you've seen 7-on-7, it's pretty pass happy. So what's the line in an Ohio State versus Michigan 7-on-7 game? -17? -21?
I was going to say 21.
Yeah.
So let's go 18.5.
Yeah.
19.
Bet the over.
Yeah.
Next one from at Ben Ricker 72. I have a question. Do you think that J.J. McCarthy can run around and make those Bryce Young type throwing plays that the Maryland quarterback made against the Ohio State defense to keep it a close game? I didn't hear anyone talk about the fact that those plays making this game way closer than it was. We've talked this week about the fact that J.J. McCarthy is better on the run than just sort of sitting back in the pocket a lot of times. I think he can make some of those plays. I don't know that he can make, if that's what it comes down to. If Michigan can't run and it's, go have J.J. McCarthy go play playground ball, I think that works to a point, but I think that, you can only do that so much. Yeah,
and Taulia Tagovailoa was really dropping some plays in there with touch, and that's something that J.J. McCarthy has not shown this year. I've talked about how he needs to be the 2004 Troy Smith. On another earlier show this week with the Michigan writer, he was suggesting Johnny Manziel 2014 against Alabama, and that's another one where that one was insane, where you're just running around, dropping the pass, picking it up, throwing touchdowns. Like, I'm not even sure Johnny Manziel knew what plays were going on. He was just out there doing some crazy stuff, and it was incredible. And at some point, I think they're going to need some of that from J.J. McCarthy. I think boldly, I expect him to have at least 8 rushes in this game.
That is incredibly bold. Wish you had thought that included that in our bold prediction show earlier this week, because that is, man, I would have given you 3 points for that one. Next one, Coach Chad 5399. Can Zach Harrison play the entire game like he did the last 2 meaningful plays versus Maryland? Just as a reminder, that was sack, forced fumble, recovered for touchdown. If he could do that, I am old enough to have watched Lawrence Taylor play in his prime as a New York Giants fan in the mid-1980s. Not even Lawrence Taylor did that. I mean, so no, that's you can't, in fact, play like that. That was also two exceptionally obvious passing situations, and Maryland did not give the left tackle any help on either of those, which was a choice you could make. You cannot play the whole game like that, because if he had, those two snaps, he got halfway to Ohio State's single game sack record. So, that is a pretty good month to have a sack and another sack and a forced fumble and a leading to a pick set, or leading to a scoop and score 6. Yeah, that's a pretty good that's a pretty good half month of work, I would say, let alone 2 snaps.
Yeah, and we always talk about sacks can't be the only measurement for a defensive end, but those 2 plays were incredible. And the first one was a bit of a bull rush, the second one was a speed rush, and yeah, why don't you do that every time? That's what they say every time you sack somebody. Why don't you do that every time? And it's because there are other players involved. There's an offensive lineman, perhaps a chipping running back or a chipping tight end, that sort of thing. And I don't think Jim Knowles waited until he's like, you know what? Now is a good time to call the sack play. Tom, anything else?
Yeah, Jim Knowles always jokes about, why don't you call the play that's a turnover play? It's like, yes, which one is that again? Yes, that if they had the magical turnover play, Jim Knowles went to an Ivy League school. I'm sure he'd be smart enough to call it if they had the magical sack play, but he did it. He did it when they needed it to. So maybe he's just smart and saved it for the very last moment.
All right, then I think that will do it. That should be enough to get you to Saturday morning when our pregame show extravaganza hits you in the face and just unrelenting. Although we will have some stuff. I'm not sure when you're hearing this. We're going to have some Friday stuff, live stuff as well that we'll announce. So just go ahead, get notified, hit that bell to be notified, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Buckeye Huddle, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle, or find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member there, and we'll tell you all about the other plans we have for the rest of the week. So I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys later.